As you were hearing this passage, if you were thinking, I heard this passage before not too long ago, you're right. I preached on this passage at the beginning of our Lenten season back in March. I am going to invite you today to look at this passage and take it really apart by not only examining the lesson of the story, if you will, but also the structure of the story more closely. How Jesus uses rule of three, the structure, in a way to flip the expectation of the hearers altogether and what we can gather from that. Have you heard of the rule of three? Anyone? English majors out there? I know there are many English majors out there. In the literary world, we see the rule of three in stories like The Boy Who Cried Wolf or Goldilocks and the Three Bears. In this rule of three, there are sequence of either three characters or three actions. The first two establishes a pattern, but the third breaks this pattern. In the case of The Boy Who Cried Wolf, as you know, a shepherd boy falsely shouts, "Wolf!" That's right. How many times? 3 times altogether, but the first 2 times he cries wolf falsely, fooling the villagers to come and help him each time. But when a true wolf actually comes to threaten the sheep, the boy cries wolf once again, calling for help. However, the villagers do not believe him, thinking that he is fooling them again. They do not come to help him, and his sheep are harmed. In Goldilocks' case, Papa's porridge is too hot. Mama's porridge is too cold. And the baby bear's porridge is just right. This pattern repeats where the first 2 is not right for some reason, but the third is just right. We have the rule of 3 in today's story about the Good Samaritan, as this parable has come to be known, where there are 3 different characters along with 3 opportunities to help a man who has fallen into the hands of robbers. Definitely a believable pretext in that the 17-mile stretch between Jerusalem and Jericho was notorious for being dangerous. First, let me clarify what precedes the telling of this parable, because it makes a difference. Jesus was saying how wise and intelligent and important people cannot see God's truth. Jesus tells his disciples, "Blessed are the eyes that see what you see, for I tell you that many prophets and kings desire to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." It is after this that this lawyer stands up, one of the wise and intelligent and important persons, to ask Jesus a question. And it was not a simple, "Hey, Jesus, I'm really curious, and I'm really wondering" kind of question, but the kind of question to test Jesus. Perhaps to show others how much smarter he is compared to Jesus. Now, point of clarification. The Greek word referring to the lawyer here is nomikos. However, nomikos is better translated as a scribe, an expert in interpretation of the Mosaic law. So, As an expert in Mosaic law, he asks Jesus about how one can inherit eternal life. And lawyer is not a bad interpretation or translation because it is Mosaic law, right? It's just that when we modern hearers hear this word, we automatically think of lawyers in our context. So that's why I am making this distinguishment. And the scribe, when he asked these questions to Jesus, whether to make himself look good or to trick Jesus, Jesus, being the master rabbi teacher himself, turns it around and asks the scribe what the law, the Mosaic law, says about the very topic he is asking about. The scribe easily responds by reciting the Shema, the central Jewish prayer found in Deuteronomy 6:4-9, which reads, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." The scribe actually adds the mind part because Deuteronomy doesn't have the mind. It just has strength and soul and heart. So he modifies this a little bit. Jesus is satisfied with the answer and affirms him and says, yes, you know it well. Do this, and you will live. We could have stopped there, but the scribe has a follow-up question to justify himself. And he asks, "And who is my neighbor?" This was actually a long debated question among the Jews, as they had to deal with many foreigners and others who did not believe in their God, who did not practice their faith, and they were always coming up against who is our neighbor. According to Amy Jill Levine, professor of New Testament and Jewish studies, she says that this question is actually more of a polite way of asking, who is not my neighbor? Or who does not deserve my love? Or even, whom can I hate? Jesus tells them this parable to answer this question of who can I hate? Who's not included in that neighborly love? And he uses this rule of three. 3 different characters who can save this victim. 3 different possibilities. The first is a priest who sees the wounded person and chooses to pass by on the other side of the road. The second is a Levite, a temple officer, and he too sees a wounded man and passes by on the other side of the road. Thomas Long, who's a retired New Testament and homiletics professor, writes, "The pattern has now been set, right? 2 experiences of seeing, passing by, and an opportunity lost." He says, according to the rule of 3, the hearers now expect a third character to do something different. The wounded man's fortune is about to change. So, who is expected as the third person to come to change the victim's fortune, fate? Whom are the hearers of this parable expecting? You know how something are so culturally given, like Larry, Moen, Curly, Peter, Paul, and good. Let's see if you know this one. Harry, Hermione, and Ron from Harry Potter for a younger audience here. And everybody should know this one: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Similarly, when you have a priest, a Levite, and blank, the third person is always an Israelite in their cultural context and norm, according to Levine. So think about that. You're expecting Larry, Mo, and Curly, Father, Son, and Spirit. Yet Jesus throws everyone off by introducing the third character to be a Samaritan instead of what they were expecting was an Israelite. In their mind, when they hear a priest, a Levite, the third person has to be an Israelite. There is no other option. Yet, Jesus says, a Samaritan. It's like hearing Father, Son, and Sophia. It's like hearing, and this is Professor Levine's example, Larry, Mo, and Osama bin Laden. It just doesn't fit. It simply does not make any sense to have the third character to be a Samaritan. Israelites and Samaritans were enemies. Jews did not regard Samaritans to be their equal and consider them to be completely other, sharing nothing in common. Now, it's another story why they became enemies. That will be for another time. I want to go back to this third character of Samaritan. An improbable candidate who, unlike the priest or the Levite, sees the wounded man and shows mercy and compassion. Unlike the priest and the Levite, he obeys the commandment to love God by loving your neighbor as yourself. As the hearer are still getting over the shock of the fact that this is a Samaritan, Jesus asks, so, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The scribe answers, the one who showed mercy. The one who showed mercy. He couldn't even bring himself to say the Samaritan. Thomas Long and other scholars believe that there is something more to this parable than simple example story, which has been said many times. A good example we should all follow. If Jesus wanted to give a simple example story, though, he would not have complicated this story by introducing a Samaritan, someone who is despised by Jews. He could have done that just simply by introducing the third person to be an Israelite, and it would have had the same effect. And some have emphasized that this is an anti-clergy story. Did anyone hear that interpretation? Stating that the priest and the Levite were hypocrites who lacked compassion, and the layperson is the one who gets it right. Remember, the priest and the Levite are too concerned with the purity law to help the wounded. Yes, maybe, but there's flaw in this interpretation as well, as the wounded man is not dead, he is wounded. And the purity law, if you remember your Leviticus, did not apply here. And even if the man was dead, the law demands burying an unattended corpse to be something important. So it would not have harmed the priest and the Levite to tend to this wounded man. So the conclusion by Thomas Long and others is that they avoided the wounded man out of concern for their own safety, not because their desire to be lawful by keeping their purity. As Long puts it, and I quote, "They knew the commandments, but regardless of what the commandments say, when the chips are down, it's just easier and safer not to get involved." I know I'm guilty of this. I don't want to be bothered sometimes by folks requesting help here at church every week. And it is easier to say, "Susan, can you just tell them I'm in a meeting? I'm in the middle of something and I will get disrupted and I don't know when I will be able to go back to doing what I was doing." And Susan's smiling because this just happened last week. So what can we gather from this parable? What we can gather and take away, one of them is this. This parable is not just a moral lesson. It's a spiritual confrontation. And this is exactly what Jesus was saying earlier, that wise and intelligent and important people want to see the truth, but they will not see it. The scribe half-heartedly admits that the Samaritan is the one who acted in neighborly love, obeying God's commandment to love God by loving neighbors. The scribe is forced to recognize the act of genuine love demonstrated by the Samaritan, one he once identified as enemy and not good enough. And when Jesus said, "Do likewise," he was not saying that we should only consider those who show mercy as our neighbors, because we could read it that way. Because the scribe says, who's your neighbor then? The one who showed mercy. Then go do likewise. So do we become neighbors to and love those only who show mercy to us? That's not the point of the story. Jesus is challenging the scribe and us to confront truth that dismantles our assumptions and see the world in a different light. The scribe and we are being called to see the world in an entirely different light because of this truth, that Jesus, the Son of God, was sent to this world to live among us as one of us and to die and to rise again, to show another way. The scribe no longer says, or can no longer say, that he and the Samaritans have nothing in common. He can no longer ignore and dismiss them or their faith. The scribe who wanted to put a parameter, a limitation on who deserves his love, now cannot do that anymore. Now he has to reconsider his whole worldview. Do likewise. If the truth does not fit into our own predetermined convictions, if the truth is inconvenient, if the truth exposes and threatens our status quo, then we are tempted not to see it. Or worse, we see it and still walk by on the other side. But when we enter into a true relationship with Jesus Christ, we are invited to see the world through his eyes. When our eyes are open to see what Jesus truly meant, why his good news is truly the good news, and what he is calling us to embrace by doing likewise, we cannot live the way we used to. We cannot unsee it. We cannot go back. We are called to cross over lines of division, friends. We are called to mercy when that is inconvenient. We are called to love that costs us something. Yes, it is exhausting, and it will be exhausting because our whole world is changing, and it will be a lot easier to draw that line. But yes, it will stretch us because love always does. And yet, how exhilarating, how exciting, how freeing, how alive we become when we stop asking, "Who is my neighbor?" and start living as one. Do likewise.